For those of you who don't know me, I am Christina Hildebrand. I'm the founder and president of A Voice for Choice Advocacy, and we educate and advocate for informed choice and transparency of what goes into your body. So that's food, air, water, pharmaceuticals. Basically, we want you to know what's in it, and you get to choose whether you put that into your body or not. So I'm going to start going through the questions. Again, they're the questions that people have asked in the Q&A button. I will answer pretty much any question as long as it's related to that mission statement. So, and if I don't know the answer, I'll let you know that. So first question, what are your thoughts on Suramin that Judy Mikovits is suggesting to use as an antidote to the COVID jab? I don't know anything about it. I'm not a doctor. I should also say that. So caveat, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I just am an autodidact, which means I have read and read and read, and I read everything from both sides. So I read both, things that are for what we believe in and things that are not for what we believe in, just to get my perspective and where I sit with things. I don't know anything about Suramin. I trust Judy to have done her research. I think the mRNA vaccines, I don't know that anyone can say that there is an antidote to it. I also am not sure if you are taking the vaccine why you would take an antidote. I'm assuming you mean sort of a detox. And I think if you take the J&J vaccine or the Novavax vaccine, which is coming out soon, those ones there are more proven ways to detox from them. The mRNA vaccine, I think you can detox from the ingredients. So for example, the PEG ingredients, but the mechanism, we really just don't know how that affects your body. So I think anyone who's saying that they know how to detox the mRNA vaccines other than the ingredients is, I don't think there's any evidence of that yet. All right, next question. Do you have any input with respect to the vaccine transmission from vaccinated persons to unvaccinated persons? Do you have any suggestions of boundaries with this issue in regards to living in the same household or hugging vaccinated friends? Have you seen any potential examples of transmission happening yourself? So I think this is a really interesting one. So a lot of people are saying that they have seen different phenomenon when they're around vaccinated people. And I will go back to, I don't think we have the evidence at this point. I think it's, similarly, we don't have the evidence on these vaccines. I don't think we know what happens. In my mind, the mRNA vaccines, could people be shedding something? I would personally say very possibly. And the reason I say that is that the mRNA vaccines are creating the spike protein, which is the viral protein, so that your body then can attack it with antibodies. So that while they're not a live vaccine, they are creating that spike protein as in your body and replicating that as a first part. mRNA vaccines have never been used in humans before. They've never made it past phase 1 clinical trials. So anyone who says that they have any idea what these are doing really to your immune system, I think, doesn't know, is lying. So could they be doing something that we don't understand at this point? Yes. I think, I will go as far as saying, I'm taking a class in immunology at the moment, and I would go as far as saying just the whole immune system, we don't know that much about. And so for anyone to say they know exactly how these things work and all of the pieces of your immune system, we don't even know that just in general. So I think, so for me, people say, well, do you not go around vaccinated people? What I think you have to do what you feel comfortable with. For me, I'm not going to stop living my life because there are vaccinated people around me. If I, am I cognizant of what's going on around me? Yes. Do I live with any people? No. If I had to go to work, would I do anything differently? Probably not. I probably would be cognizant of it. I would be aware and see whether I had any effect and see. But you also, there's the placebo effect in that piece too, where, are you going into it thinking, oh, my period's been really long this month. I'm pretty sure it's longer than it was. Or I'm getting headaches and maybe that's the vaccine, or maybe the vaccinated people around me. I think until we have long-term studies on this, we know as much about this as we do about the vaccine in particular. Hugging vaccinated friends and family, you have to work out the mental health of that. So if you're not going to hug those friends, what does that do to you mentally? Personally, I hug people all the time. And to me, the endorphins that are released and everything else that's released when I hug a friend, I believe would have more positive effects than the negative effects of that person if it is doing something. So, I think, again, it's how I live my life, and how, with the Voice for Choice advocacy, you have to make an informed decision. You have to make the decision that is best for you and your family. And that's different for each individual. Hopefully that answered your question. Hi, could you please tell us about how things will proceed COVID vaccine-wise with folks who have medical exemptions from vaccines? Are entities taking medical exemptions into account? How about vaccine passports? Will those with medical exemptions be unable to travel, or will they be able to get the passport? Thanks. Well, first of all, I hope we don't ever have passports. That's what we're fighting against at the moment. I think it will be hard at this point to implement COVID vaccine passports because they're not ready to go. I mean, we saw in New York City where they tried to roll one out. It was an absolute disaster. I think with things opening up, I would make sure that, wherever you are, in the US, and I talk about the US because that's what I know best, but wherever you are, make sure you're going out. Make sure, in California, in everywhere else, they have raised the mask mandates in many places, and stores are allowing you to go in without masks. Make sure you take advantage of that, and because the more of a mishmash it becomes of who's vaccinated, who's not vaccinated, so many vaccinated people are keeping their masks on and do not want to go around unmasked. And so, the more people, it's just a complete mix of people, and you don't know who's vaccinated, who's not. And to then implement something like vaccine passports on top of that, I think will be hard. I think from a travel perspective, I don't think that the vaccine is the be all and end all. I think it's either a vaccine or a negative COVID test. And I think that's how it will be implemented for travel. And so will you be able to travel? Yes, you'll be able to travel in my perspective. As for medical exemptions, so it really depends on what you're talking about. So let's take the three scenarios are school, college, and employment. Those are the three main ones. Travel also. So if you have a medical exemption, for example, if you go to Africa, certain parts of Africa, Ghana and places, you need the yellow fever vaccine. You can have a medical exemption to get into Ghana that says that you cannot take the yellow fever vaccine. It may mean that you have to take additional precautions. And I think the same will be true for this. But for K through 12 COVID vaccines, they do not, so COVID cannot be added to a school requirement without either the CDPH putting it in place. And if the CDPH puts it in place, then it would have to have a personal belief exemption per the law, or if the legislature puts it through. And if Senator Pan is in the California legislature next year, I would give it a 99.9% chance that he will bring forward legislation to put the COVID vaccine in place for seventh graders. So at that seventh grade checkpoint, that would be my guess. And I say that because he started talking about it. And he usually gives us about 6 months leeway in letting us know what he's thinking. And it's also his last year in office. If he doesn't go to DC, this is his last year in office. So I do think that will be his last hurrah. For college, most colleges are offering, I would say all colleges that we know of are offering, and if they're not, we've written to them, are offering religious exemptions and medical exemptions. And the reason behind that is, or the reason we believe behind that is an argument that a Voice for Choice advocacy made to the UC system, to the University of California system. And basically our argument was that when they brought in the flu vaccine for all, we were very vocal with that. We did a survey amongst their students and their employees, which they tried to censor us. They didn't succeed in censoring us, but they tried to censor us. But we sent them a letter saying that if you require your staff to get vaccinated with the flu vaccine, you have to offer them a religious exemption. If you then don't give the students that religious exemption as well for that vaccine, then there's religious discrimination. And so they actually changed their policy to include a religious exemption for their students. And what we're seeing across the country is that religious exemptions are being allowed for students in schools. Now, California and a few other states are very few other states are the only ones that have just medical exemptions for some of their colleges. Many colleges in California still have a religious exemption as well. But these colleges requiring vaccines is nothing new. Just most colleges and universities follow what their K through 12 does. So if their K through 12 has a personal belief exemption, then the colleges have a personal belief exemption. And so the fact that most of these colleges have religious exemptions for the COVID vaccine is nothing new, because that's what they've done. As for employers, employers have to offer a religious exemption as well as a medical exemption. So, and they also have to have a disability exemption, although that doesn't really, there's nothing, there's very few disabled people that can't get the COVID vaccine from their disability perspective. Okay, next question. Since the 12 to 15 vaccination is moving faster than what you had anticipated, what can we expect about the younger age group? Do you think we still have 2021 for kids ages 10 to be able to attend school without being asked to vaccinate? It looks like approvals are going so fast that the FDA may approve for kids and not for EUA. So they have to have 3 to 6 months data even to do the emergency use authorization. So it is going faster. We expected to have the 12 to 15-year-olds by September, and they decided to do it on 3 months of data. 1,100 kids, 12 to 15-year-olds, was all that got the vaccine. So, my daughters are both in this age range, and their friends are getting it. Parents are asking me about it, and that's the one that I really feel strongly about, that that it just has not been studied. I mean, 1,000 kids is not 1,100 kids is not a lot of people. I wouldn't trust 1,000. If you were testing some brand new drug, you would never give it. I mean, you would expect your child to be in clinical trials if they're number 1,101. You wouldn't expect it to be authorized, but it's authorized under emergency use. And that it's amazing to me. Emergency use authorization means that it should be used in an emergency. And the fact that they are just pushing it out to these 12 to 15-year-olds, COVID is not an emergency for 12 to 15-year-olds. And so I think I would expect the 6 to 11-year-olds to be EUA approved by, I'm thinking now August, September, because they're pushing that one through too. I think the FDA will approve the vaccine for Pfizer 16 plus, Moderna 18 plus in the next month or two. Pfizer is giving the FDA on a rolling basis the information that they are requiring for full approval. So that is much faster. Do I think we are going to have until the 2021-22 school year? Yes. Do I think we are going to have? I think the earliest mandate in schools would be next school year, so 2022 to 2023. I do think Penn will try and push that through in California. I think the pressure actually is not going to come from mandates. I think it's going to come from schools and from sort of just I hear about so many schools, so many teachers, schools are sending out emails, schools are having vaccination clinics. Nearly every high school has a vaccination clinic coming to it. The teachers are asking questions. There's just so much pressure on these kids, and 12 to 15-year-olds are the kids that just want to fit in. And so, there are those parents that definitely want to get their kids vaccinated, but there are also quite a few parents that I've talked to that are maybe vaccinated themselves, but have said, I'm not ready for my child to get this. The threat of COVID for them is not great enough. And so I want to hold off, but it's the kids that are coming to them and saying, I want to, I want to be vaccinated. You have to let me get vaccinated. And it's just, that piece of it is just scary to me, because I do not believe the research has been done on these vaccines for this age group. And 12 to 15-year-olds, I personally don't think it is good to vaccinate that age group anyway, because other than, your first 3 years of life, that's the only other time in your life when your body is going through significant development. And again, similar to the immune system, we really have no idea about the hormonal system and how it really works and what it interacts with and the long-term effects. So, okay, next question. Why is there no religious exemption for K through 12, but it's allowed at universities? So it's this, because the staff have to get religious exemptions, or because of the Equal Rights, the Civil Rights Act and the Equal Opportunity employment laws, that they have to have a religious exemption offered to them. Because they have to, it would be discrimination if the students didn't have to. It didn't have a religious exemption. And so it's this inequality, basically. Is it our thought that there is a possibility that if, for example, the COVID vaccine is required of teachers, that we wouldn't be able to get, or that we would be able to get a religious exemption for children? Yes, I think that is a hope of ours. It all comes down to whether we can convince the legislature of that, or a legal case. Okay, next question. What can you do about colleges in California already requiring the COVID shots? Do they have to accept religious exemption? Do you have the right to segregate kids who have a religious exemption, make them wear masks versus vaxxed who do not have to wear them and do daily testing? So I do believe all of the, so UC and Cal State have said that they would only require it once it's fully approved by the FDA. So that it is not required right now. It's required, they think, by the fall that it will be fully approved. So it's only required them. They do have to accept they don't have to accept a religious exemption. They have to accommodate religious exemptions. And you have to write a decent religious exemption showing that your religious beliefs are sincere and why they're sincere and why you can't be vaccinated. So you can't just say, I have religious beliefs against vaccination. That's not good enough. They can ask you to further outline what that means to you. And so they do have to accept, that people giving them to them. They then can evaluate whether they are good enough, so to speak. Do they have the right to segregate kids who have a religious exemption? So they have the right to require accommodations. So if your child is not vaccinated, and the same is true for employment, if you are not vaccinated, your employment or your employment or your college can say, okay, you don't have to be vaccinated, but we require you to wear masks. We require you to wash your hands. We require you to do testing. The one thing I would say is get your religious exemption and let's wait and see where we are in September, because September may be a very, very different place than we are now. I mean, if you look at just what's happened in the last 2 weeks with the whole masking, and, you can take your masks off outside, you can take your mask off inside, even if there are unvaccinated people in the same room, you're okay if you've been vaccinated. It's so, to me, we are seeing this develop, and it develops extremely rapidly on all fronts. And so I would say, let's wait till mid-July, August to see where we're at with this. It may be that come September, there's no masking going on. It may be that, in December, there are spikes again and everyone's required to wear a mask. So I would see where you're at. I consider the mask, if you've got people who are unvaccinated, not masked, and the people who are vaccinated, masked. Sorry, other way around. Unvaccinated, masked, vaccinated, unmasked. It does, to me, seem like, a yellow star. But having said that, I will also say that so many vaccinated people are not going to unmask themselves. And so while I do think your child may be required to wear a mask, I think there's going to, as I said, I think there's just going to be a mess, because I think there are going to be unvaccinated people not wearing masks, and I think there are going to be vaccinated people wearing masks. So take advantage of the mess. Okay, next question. Employer mandates. Aside from objecting, do you have any advice objecting first on religious grounds or medical grounds? I want to object on medical grounds. If they turn down, can I then object on religious grounds? So it is, if you have a true medical reason, and the hard thing is that there's no contraindications. There's nothing that shows why, unless you have severe anaphylaxis, that's probably the only time, or maybe you're undergoing chemotherapy or something like that. There's really no medical reasons that have been shown that you shouldn't get the vaccine. So, but if you have a doctor that says that you don't need, or you shouldn't get the COVID vaccine at this point or in the future, the medical exemption probably holds more ground, because it's a medical reason. I doubt they would deny you if you have a solid medical reason and a doctor that will sign the medical exemption. I doubt that they would turn it down, because then they are becoming your doctor. So I would say that I'm surprised on that. If they turn it down, can you object on religious grounds after that? Yeah, I would say so. I mean, one doesn't preclude you from the other. All right, next question. Can colleges requiring the vaccine be held liable if something happens to them? Do we have legal resources? So this is an interesting question. And OSHA came out with guidance for employers, which is actually funny, because a Voice for Choice Advocacy, if you read our letter from January, I think it was, that we've been sending to employers, we actually have that in there. One of our lawyers, I talked to them about it, and yes, there is liability. So your workers' comp, if your employer's workers' comp would have to cover if they've required it, not recommended it, but if they've required you to be vaccinated and something happens to you if you're employed, then you will have the opportunity to I don't think you can sue them, but you can definitely go against workers' comp. If colleges are requiring it and something happens, I would say the same thing holds. So it reminds me of the K through 12, right? So when they put in medical exemptions only and took away the personal belief exemption, parents asked me the same question, which was, if my child if I get the vaccines and I get all my child vaccinated and they have a reaction, can I sue the school? And I'm not sure you could sue the school, but you could definitely sue the state. And I think there is some recourse there. I just have not heard of a child that has been vaccinated since SB 277 that was injured, that specifically had to do it for school and then was injured. And so the answer is yes. Do you have legal recourse? I think we do. And I would say, if that happens to you, if you know that happened to someone, have them come and get in touch with us, because we would definitely like to investigate that further or take that further. Next question. If most appeals are denied and appealing would make our information public to CDPH, what would be the point of appealing? Number 2, have there been cases in which children literally had to leave school after 30 days and lose their entire semester and repeat the following year? Can you speak to how SB 277 was litigated and lost 4 times, as far as how biased the courts are, as biased as the legislature? Is there no or little discovery? Do judges follow precedent as opposed to considering laws concerning constitutional rights, medical freedom, discrimination? Okay, this is a lot of questions, so we'll go through it. I believe you're talking about the K through 12 California SB 277, SB 276, and 714, which removed the personal belief exemption, and then in 2019 made the medical exemption much stricter. So you're talking about the appeals. So many children's doctors have been disciplined at some point in their life as being a California doctor, and all of those doctors were sent out on a list. And I should clarify, the list has over 9,000 people on it, doctors on it. Not all those 9,000 have written medical exemptions. So that's the list of all doctors that are licensed by the California Medical Board or Osteopathic Board that have ever been disciplined in their career. I would say maybe 1%, maybe not even 1%, no, less than 1% of those doctors have ever written a medical exemption or even know what a medical exemption is. So they are, they basically just spread a wide net so that any doctor that's ever written a medical exemption is on that list. As for the appeals process, so many of these people, if you've contacted us, Voice for Choice Advocacy, we will help you with what next steps are. So just to be frank, the likelihood of your child being allowed in school next year, if you have a medical exemption from a doctor that has been disciplined, is extremely small, I believe. There is a chance. And so the key here is that there are doctors on that list that wrote medical exemptions that, for example, one example, she had IRS fraud 18 years ago. She was put on probation for 3 years while she dealt with the IRS. And once she had dealt with the IRS, she was taken off probation. That has nothing to do with her ability to practice medicine. And there are many, many more examples of that. There's another doctor whose wife gave medication. He was out of the office and his wife gave a patient albuterol. And so, and she did not have a medical license. And so she was practicing medicine. And rather than take it out on her, they took it out on him and put him on probation. So there are a lot of, and that again has nothing to do with vaccines, has nothing to do with his medical competency. So our thought process here is that the California legislature, the CDPH, does not have the right to practice medicine and override your medical exemption if they haven't shown that that doctor's done something wrong with writing medical exemptions. So those two examples I gave, there's no reason for that. The letter that we give you to help you appeal doesn't give any information other than your email address and your doctor's name. We are waiting to see what the responses are to those, to see what basically this is all new. So we don't know what their response is going to be. But the question becomes, are you going to stand up? And, some parents are like, nope, I'm just going to fly under the radar and not going to do this. That doesn't help anyone, really. I mean, if you want to fight this, fight it. If you don't, move away, move out of California. But it's, so to me, it is an important piece of the process. I will say CDPH has access to every one of your medical exemptions. If you think that your school, especially if you're in a public school, hasn't, shared that already, I think it's naive to think that. I think there are people, we did say to put a disclosure on that does not allow your medical exemption to be disclosed. Even with that, I think there are schools that have shown it to CDPH when they've been audited because they have the right to do that. Have there been cases where children literally have had to leave school after 30 days? There have been children that have had to leave school in a week before the appeals process was set up. So yes, there have been. They don't lose an entire semester, so it is up to you at that point to homeschool your child, to file a PSA and homeschool your child, or find a alternative education method, do something else. It's not on the school to find that. But if you were not able to homeschool your kid and you just had your kid sit at home all day, then yeah, they would lose the semester. But you have to. But it goes on you to homeschool your kid. Is that fair? No, it's not fair, but it's the way it is. Can you speak to how SB 277 was litigated? Oh, right. Okay. So there were 4 lawsuits filed. A Voice for Choice Advocacy was the 4th one. Unfortunately, one was a RICO case. So that was sort of a very different way of going about it. It did not, it didn't get past the first, the Superior Court. There were 2 other SB 277 cases that both of those, I believe, were appealed. One may not have been appealed, the other one was appealed. And then there was our case. If you want to look at these, they're on voiceforchoice.org. I want to say somewhere in issues, there's a vaccine litigation piece that you can, if you go to voiceforchoice.org and look for SB 277 litigation, it has a description of all of the cases there. Our case, and I'll talk to our case because I was most familiar with it, unfortunately came as the 4th case. I wish we had gotten it together a bit more quickly, because I think we had a really solid case. And, yes, I'm biased on that, but every lawyer that has read our case is amazed by the quality of it. I also had our lawyers write it from the perspective of being pro-vaccine. So my point was, I don't care what the judge's opinion on vaccines is. If they are the most pro-vaccine judge, they still should be able to rule in our favor. And if you can write a brief like that, then A Voice for Choice Advocacy will take this forward. And they put that together, and it was based on three contexts. It was based on bodily autonomy, so the right to decide what goes into your body. It was based on parental rights, so the right that you can raise your child as you see fit. And it was based on the free and public education, the right to education. And all three of those have been won in the Supreme Court. So we thought, on those constitutional rights, we would, even if we lost on two, there would be one of them that we would be able to win on. And the piece, so every one of these cases, not the RICO case necessarily, but the three other cases were based on, or the other side based their argument on Jacobson versus Massachusetts, which is a 1905 case, which if you read the case, it is not what is put out there in mainstream. If you read the case, it was a man who did not want to get the smallpox vaccine. It was very targeted in one city in Massachusetts, and he didn't want to get the smallpox vaccine. And he also didn't want to pay the $5 fine that he would have had to pay. And that's what he went to court on, was that he didn't want to pay the $5 fine. And the court found it that he had to pay the $5 fine. So he never got the vaccine. He never got the smallpox vaccine. He was never forced to get it. He just had to pay the $5. But that's what the basis is that 1905 case. Now, our argument was that since 1905, there's been a lot of case law that creates what's called strict scrutiny. And strict scrutiny means that you have to have a certain level of scrutiny in your documents. And we were arguing for strict scrutiny. If we had gotten that argument, our case would have moved forward and we would have probably won it. But because we were not granted strict scrutiny, it meant that the other side had to come in with a very, very low bar of what they had to argue to win. And so one of the things that A Voice for Choice Advocacy is doing is we're always looking for cases throughout the US where we can write amicus briefs to get strict scrutiny, not on the vaccine issue, but on any parental rights issue. That strict scrutiny is applied on those issues. Because if we could get strict scrutiny, I do think we would be able to win our case. We appealed our case. When we appealed our case, there was one judge on each side, one for us, one against us, and the one judge that was wavering, although I don't think he was wavering I don't think he was wavering. We were just not sure which side he was, where he was at. He brought up polio. Now, our case never mentioned any vaccines from the perspective of specific vaccines, of diseases, of science, anything like that, because we really wanted to go at it from a constitutional perspective. And he just could not stop. We only had 15 minutes to argue, and he could not stop talking about polio and how if he allowed, if he ruled in our favor, that polio would come back to the US. And so when I say that, and if you get an email from me when people ask about legal cases, my answer is the legal system, especially in California, is just as biased as the legislative system to be pro public health. And so, we did not take it to the Supreme Court because this was back in 2017-18, and our Supreme Court didn't look like it does now. I think if we had the same case now, we probably would take it to the Supreme Court. Because I think it has a chance of winning with the judges that we have now. Having said that, the Supreme Court only hears 5% of the cases that come before it or that are brought before it. So there's a very good chance that if you take a case to the Supreme Court, that it's never heard, and that bad precedent that has been created through the court system, the lower court system, stands. And so that was something we were also cognizant of. So that sort of is a long answer to that, but I don't get that question very often, so I will I want to spend a little bit more time on it. Okay, next question. Hello, thank you again for doing this. Do you have any knowledge of those that are injured by the vaccine not getting the help they need from insurance company? I have been reading terrible reports of this happening. Yeah, I think I don't necessarily know from the insurance company. I definitely think that the doctors don't know how to treat these injuries. You know, they go into the hospital and they're grappling. They don't know what to do with these people and how to treat them and what to do to make them better. So yes, I think that's the case. I think from that perspective, that's probably where the insurance companies are coming in, because they don't know, you know, I'm sure the hospitals and the physicians are asking for tests or things that aren't necessarily under, you know, the insurance claims. I think the other place that, you know, I would recommend is anybody who's been injured can have can file a complaint into it's not the vaccine injury court, it's the PrEP court, the CPIP maybe, CPIP, that comes under the PrEP Act, which is the compensation program. And so, you know, I would, if I were injured, I would definitely file a complaint in there and see if you can get, you know, financial or any form of compensation. Next question. Can the FDA and CDC approve these EUA shots before the clinical trials are set to end in 11/22 and 1/23? Good question. Should they be able to? No. Will they? Yes. The Pfizer vaccine will be approved by, I think, the end of May, beginning of June, maybe July, but I think by July we will definitely have an approved vaccine. How can they do that, people say? So the clinical trials will not finish until then, but what you have to understand is that the clinical trials no longer have a placebo arm to them, because everyone in the clinical trials who was on the placebo side was allowed to get the vaccine when they became eligible for it. And so given that now everyone is eligible, everyone who's under emergency use authorization is eligible for the vaccine, or has been in the clinical trials, is then eligible for the vaccine, they no longer have a placebo group. So their argument is, in 6 months, they have enough data for side effects, and they don't have long-term efficacy data, but they have 6 months worth of efficacy data. And therefore they, you know, that's good enough. And the FDA is buying it. You know, for me, I think the FDA should hold out until the end of the clinical trials, and do, you know, and require them to have the same level of scrutiny as other vaccines. But I think this is going to go much quicker. I think the FDA wants, and the CDC want an approved vaccine, because that's one of the things that people are using as an excuse for not getting the vaccine. All right, next question. There are lots of questions on the stand-up emails about colleges and how to reach teens to inform themselves of health choices. So this is interesting. Teens, I think, are an interesting group, and it's a conversation I had with a group of individuals that are from different organizations in California that we work with. And you know, we started off the conversation started off with, you know, how do we target the parents? How do we stop the vaccine clinics in high school? And what I found is, or what I think is we're not going to stop the vaccination clinics, and we're not going to stop the parents. If anything, I would say the parents are more hesitant than the kids. The amount of pressure on teens to get these vaccines is ridiculous. The amount of peer pressure, the amount of, well, have you been vaccinated? You know, the answer that this is an age group that just wants to say yes and be part of the crowd. They don't want to stand out in the crowd. They don't want to deal with that. And they don't see the long-term effects of these vaccines. They're not concerned with them. They don't inform themselves. And so to me, you know, if you have a teen and they are informed enough to have made the decision not to get the vaccine, my ask of you for them, and, you know, it's hard when you're one of these kids, because as I said, you just want to be part of the crowd. You don't want to stand out, is to get them to talk to their friends about it. But I think so many of them are just going to go do it, and just, you know, it's better to be vaccinated and be in the in crowd than not and stand out. You know, I think the biggest piece to me is the two pieces that I said before, the fact that only 1,100 teens got the vaccine, you know, or 12 to 15-year-olds got the vaccine prior to being authorized. That, you know, that's nothing. And then the other argument is that, you know, they have not done long-term studies on infertility, and that just, you know, would really concern me. Okay, next question. I received an email saying my 10th grader's medical exemption is void. What are my options to keep her in school? What happened to the only 2 checkpoints being 7th and K? So most likely, and anybody who is in this situation, please email me, and I can get you on the right, you know, I can get you all the information that we've been sending out. The reason most likely why your 10th grader's medical exemption is void is because your doctor has been disciplined. And this was put into the law in 2019. We argued that it was stupid at the time, but weren't listened to. If you remember that, if you were around for that, you know, this law was just rushed through. Your options to keep her in school are very, very limited. So basically, you need to get another medical exemption, and it needs to go through the CareME system. I will say I do not know of a single doctor that is willing to do that. Or you need to vaccinate her to keep her in a regular school. Your other options are homeschooling or moving out of state. That's the other option. The other piece, if your child has an IEP, has special needs in an IEP, then they are exempt. So yeah, those are the pieces of the puzzle that you have to play with. But unfortunately, there is not a way to stay in school without taking some action. You can't go to school with how you are right now. As I said, we are helping parents with many options. With appealing, we don't know. I would also say you should appeal, depending on your doctor. We can help you with that. There's a possibility that works. We don't know. It's brand new process. There is, we will likely have, we're looking into having some form of lawsuit. But Voice for Choice Advocacy takes lawsuits extremely seriously because you don't want to set bad precedent. So we may have one. There are other things that we're doing that I'm not. If you get in contact with us, I'll share with you. But we're not. We're not. Posting all over the place about. Okay, will schools be able to force masks for kids who aren't vaccinated because of medical exemption? Again, my answer is speak up, go to your Board of Supervisors meeting, go to your Board of Education meetings and say you don't want kids in masks. I think it's ridiculous that kids are in masks to begin with, especially now that most adults that they are around are vaccinated. There was an argument that they could spread COVID to those that were more, that were older and more vulnerable. Those people, if they really feel that vulnerable, should be vaccinated. So, there's no reason to have kids in school in masks anymore. I think my guess is by June, my big date here in California is June 15th, when all of this stuff is supposed to lighten up. I also think that they're going to put out new guidelines for schools for September, and we have to see what those include. But I would say go to your school board and go to your Board of Supervisors and tell them that kids should not be in masks now or in September, whether they're vaccinated or unvaccinated. A teacher was asked to turn in COVID vaccine card and could go maskless, otherwise to have to continue wearing a mask. Isn't this discrimination, a HIPAA violation, because everyone knows your medical status? So let's be very clear. HIPAA is only between you and your doctor. It is a law, a medical privacy law, that says that your doctor cannot share your medical information without anyone else, without your expressive consent. So this has nothing to do with HIPAA. That's the only thing HIPAA. Now, is it a medical privacy issue for which there are other laws? Yes, it is. If this is a private school, private schools can put in policies that are theirs, and they don't have to answer to anyone. Having said that, I would say, yes, it's discrimination. I would say that it shares your medical information because you now have a star on you. We are looking into this from the perspective of, so there's a couple of court cases, one in particular with regards to the hepatitis B vaccine, and a child that had to do with hepatitis B, not the vaccine, that had hepatitis, that the other kids in the parents in the classroom, parents of kids in the classroom, complained that their status had not been made public. And it basically said that the likelihood of that child passing on hepatitis B to others in the classroom was not great enough that they did not have to disclose it. And so looking into laws like that, or court cases like that, that argue that somebody who is unvaccinated, if they're around a certain percentage of vaccinated people, they're only at a risk to themselves. And so do they have to keep wearing the mask? There are also lawsuits from nurses during the flu season that won cases where they did not have to wear a mask any longer because of that. So we are looking into it. I do think there is an argument there. The unfortunate thing is that we live in a state that is just so fearful. So yeah. Okay. Are there resources you can recommend for connecting with other parents interested in starting a homeschool co-op? So I would recommend joining Stand Up California. If you go to standupcalifornia.com, it's a grassroots project of a voice for choice advocacy. Find your county, join that, and ask if there are any people interested in homeschooling. I think there are a lot of people out there, and that's part of the reason, we started Stand Up California for two reasons. One, so that people got together and went to their board of supervisors and the board of education and local meetings. And the other reason was to have people that are, in a similar tribe to you that you can pool resources. So the answer is yes, I'm sure there are people. You need to find the people, and I would recommend that piece of it. The other place that, when parents ask me about homeschooling, I don't like Facebook, but if you type in your area and then homeschoolers or homeschool, it usually comes up with a group in your area, and there are thousands of people in that group. And even if you don't use Facebook in that group, just to post on to see who's in your area or what resources are in your area. Okay, next question. I need to start hurrying up through these. With regards to the Santa Clara County passing a new order today, is there any way to protect the privacy of an individual with regards to sharing their vaccine status with the employer? I did not see anything come through from Santa Clara County. So if you could put another question in with the information on what Santa Clara County passed, because I did not see it yet. I've been super busy today. Okay, next question. My children have homeopathic vaccine cards. Do you know if there's any law allowing or not allowing homeopathic vaccines for the school vaccine requirements? So they are not considered vaccines per se. Have schools allowed them? Yes. They have to be given by an MD. It's basically, it's a hard question to answer. The answer is, have they been used? Yes. Did the school realize they were being used? Possibly, possibly not. Is it a foolproof way of getting, your vaccines, kids okay with their vaccines for school? Absolutely not. They're not considered true vaccines. And similarly, because they don't have clinical trials around them. So, my perspective of them is they may work, they may not work, but they don't have the research around them to show that they do. And so, I'll play devil's advocate on the other side, which is, if you're expecting the vaccines to have clinical trials before you take them and be FDA approved before you take them, why are you not wanting the same thing of homeopathic remedies? And you can argue, till you're blue in the face with me and I'll agree with you that, they've been around for eons and eons, but homeoprophylaxis is slightly different than homeopathic medication because you are doing it prophylactically. And so there aren't clinical trials around it. So next question. My child is using an ME to attend school and will be grandfathered up until 12th grade. Considering the current situation, could the private school mandate the COVID vaccine for attending school without passing legislative bill? They cannot. A county order is an interesting one. So with AB 262, under epidemic conditions, the local health officer can put in a mandate, but I believe it would have to have a personal belief exemption because that's what the law says. Okay, there is a lawyer I heard speaking about using this affidavit to decline the vaccine. regardless of the situation, but maybe especially for work. Alphonse Fajolia is his name, and the document he is recommending is the Statement for Declination of Offer of Influenza Product. Have you seen or heard of this or have an opinion? I haven't seen that exact one, but I've seen thousands of similar ones, I'm pretty sure. Good luck with it is my answer to you. Great. So you show them this paper. Some of them are a page long, some of them are 18 pages long, and go into how vaccines are bad and all the rest of it. So you give them that information and their answer is, no, you need to get the vaccine. And you say, but I don't want to get the vaccine, and these are all the reasons. And they usually have to sign the form, and they say, we're not signing the form. And you say, but I don't want the vaccine. I'm not going to take the vaccine. And they say, fine, then you're fired. So the only recourse, and even with a religious exemption, it's hard in California because California is an at-will state, which means that you can be fired for no reason at all, and you can leave your company for no reason at all at a moment's notice without having any time. And so while with a religious exemption, if you know you've been let go because you have religious beliefs, then you can file a discrimination lawsuit. But, I've had many people email me and say, well, my employer is saying that I have to get the vaccine. If I give them a religious exemption, I can put that forward. But if they really don't want me and want me to get vaccinated, they're just going to fire me for some other reason in, 2-3 weeks time. And the answer is, yeah, they can do that in California. I do think there will be a discrimination lawsuit on religious grounds at some point, but it's hard to prove. It's hard to prove unless you can find documentation that that's the reason that they're firing you, which if you're doing that as an employer, you're really stupid if you're not being smart about it. Okay, who in our California Senate will help push legislature to remove the emergency use, etc.? Who can we support? I'm not sure I understand that question. But for legislation, I think you're talking about the emergency order. So Newsom is the only one who can remove the emergency order on California. I think that will happen June 15th. But even with that, our local health officers can make any decision, take any action in an epidemic. An epidemic is 3 people. And so they still have the power to do that, our local health officers, even when we don't have an emergency order. But having said that, I think it will be much harder, and I think there could be lawsuits. As for legislators who we can support, you really need to look in your area who it is at the time of elections. Our state is so blue. It is unbelievable. And the question is, with COVID, have they gone more blue on this issue, or have some of them come to some middle ground and understand that, vaccine mandates aren't the way to go forward, those types of things. And that's an assessment that we haven't seen yet, because part of it is we don't have access to our legislature at the moment, because they're not in the Capitol. To get meetings with them is really hard. We do it, but it's hard to do. I would recommend on that front going to your local town halls, going to your town hall meetings of your legislators. Next question. For California public schools, it's hard to imagine how we can keep our medical exemption for the next grade span, considering how few doctors are willing to write them now. Is there a protocol you recommend or detox strategy for vaccinating as slowly and safely as possible to enter 7th grade? So for 7th grade, you need 10 shots, 10 individual stabs. Beyond that, you may be required to get 2 hepatitis B vaccines. Hepatitis B is a really weird one. It's required for school. It is just not required for entrance into 7th grade. And so it is a weird one, but you need to get 10 shots to get into 7th grade. And my advice is find a doctor, a naturopath that has done detox. There are enough of them out there. Most of the ones that we're doing medical exemptions, writing medical exemptions, are well versed in detoxing your kids. You can also look up Russell Blaylock. He has a detox protocol, but you have to talk to the doctor who's given the vaccines, to determine what is the best protocol for your child. If you're doing 1 a month, that's 11 months or 10 months, 10, 12 months of vaccinations, so you need to think well ahead. Okay, next question. Please share how we can prepare a religious exemption for our college going children. So you want to reach out to me. One thing I will say, I have many parents coming to me for their grown adult over 18 children. And I would do the same for my child, but I cannot give advice, or I won't give advice. It's not that I can't. I won't give advice to another adult. And yes, if your children are over 18, they're adults, and this is coming from them through a parent. So I'm happy for the parents to take the lead in the email as long as their children are CC'd on it, because the children are the ones that are going to have to submit this and defend it. And so if they're not on board, or they feel that the language that the parent has used isn't their language, it doesn't get us anywhere, and I don't want to be responsible for that. So what can you do to prepare? So if you email me, my response will be, send me the college policy. So some of them have forms, some of them just require a letter, what their religious exemption policy is and how you go about completing a religious exemption. Many colleges, if they don't have vaccine requirements, don't have that religious exemption form ready yet. So for example, the CSU system does not have it ready yet. The UC system has the one from the flu vaccine, so I assume that the one for COVID is similar, but they haven't put one out either. And then what I ask is for your child, and as I said, you can write it for them, but they have to approve it. They have to read through it and say, yes, this is my words, this is how I feel. They need to send me a paragraph that basically outlines their religious beliefs of why they can't get the vaccine, whether they were raised in a religion and what that looks like, whether they were, what religion they are, if they're part of an organized religion, if they read any spiritual texts, and from those texts, if they do, what texts sort of help guide them to come to the realization that that God or whoever their higher being is telling them not to get this vaccine. Once I have that, I will read through it and I will give recommendations of how to refine it and write it better, or to just to wordsmith it. But that's that is my recommendation. If you and the more of that you can get me first time around, the better I am at getting back to you and giving it. I will say my email gets completely clogged, so I'm running at about a 3-day deficit right now. But yes, I'm happy to help anyone with religious exemptions or any other exemptions. Is there a collective effort, i.e. moveon.org, like to send letters to county, state, etc. about vaccine passports, privacy concerns, vaccine oppositions for young children? So my recommendation, I believe you are a part of Stand Up California. On the Stand Up California site, we have an issues page, and vaccine passports are in there. I'm in the process of putting together sort of bullet points of those talking points. We have a letter that we've written. What I would recommend, and on Stand Up California, if you go to the county you're in, if you go to Stand Up California Unite /Unite, you find your county, and if you click on that county, it has a link to the Board of Supervisors. It has a link to your elected officials. So your part of this is on you. MoveOn.org and petitions honestly do nothing. You can send as many petitions as you want. They're not going to be read. It's a matter of actually standing up and doing something and going to your Board of Supervisors meetings, going to your school board meetings, going to your legislature town halls, Zoom calls, whatever they're doing, vaccine clinics. Go show up at the vaccine clinic and give them your thoughts on the vaccine. Don't be antagonistic when you do this. Don't be so. The one thing I will say is when you go give public comment, be assertive, but don't put them on the defensive, because the first thing when you start attacking someone, this is anyone in life, and you start attacking someone, the first thing they're going to do is be defensive and try and position themselves in a way to fight back. And that's not a way to get them on your side. You want to be empathetic. You want to meet them where they're at. You want to talk to them and convince them, put your arm around them and bring them with you rather than just attacking them. And so that's my advice in life, but that's my advice in doing that. But I think everyone on this call, everyone out there needs to be going to their Board of Supervisors meetings, which are usually every 2 weeks. Their city council meetings, their Board of Education meetings. And I would say, even if you have kids in private school, go to your Board of Education meetings, because very often, like my kids' private schools look to their public school districts as to what the protocol is for COVID protocol. And so if you're making an impact on the superintendent or on the Board of Education, then that will trickle down to private schools as well. So don't think just because you're in a private school that you shouldn't do those things, but it's up to all of us to stand up. So how does the Nuremberg Code stand up in court as an argument against mandates for experimental medicine? So the Nuremberg Code has not been ratified by the US. There are similar codes for research participants that you have to be fully informed, et cetera, et cetera. This is no longer considered an experimental medicine because it's been approved for emergency use. So the Nuremberg, if you're going that, I would look at Rita Fulmich in Europe that is doing sort of a second Nuremberg trial. And I'm watching that. I'm curious to see how it comes about and what exactly he's doing. But I think that will be the way that plays out. But there isn't really an argument in our court system for the Nuremberg Code. There are experimental research laws, but this isn't considered. You're not a guinea pig if you're getting an EUA. You're signing up for it. That's part of the reason why employers are being, and the Army and armed forces are being told that they can't require it or are not requiring it until it's fully approved. Okay. Can you confirm this? Today I heard from an extremely reliable source that the CDC has recategorized all their COVID-19 deaths in the past 15 months from March 2020. Recently, they changed them and stated that only 6% of deaths were actually from COVID, and the other 94% of deaths had an average of 2 comorbidities as the true causes of death, not COVID-19. Then the CDC changed their COVID-19 deaths again down to 5%, and the remaining 95 had 4 comorbidities. 5% of 568,000 total claimed COVID deaths means 28,400 people who died from COVID-19 in the past 15 months. They also stated that, for reference, almost 3,300 people die per day in auto accidents. People are 52 times more likely to die in an auto accident than COVID-19. Have you heard of this change in death classifications, and what does it mean to you? And where can I find this change data? Looked on the CDC website, and the additional death numbers are there. So this is something that we have asked, and there's actually a bill by Evan Lowe going through California where they are asking for better death records. They are doing it, they want it on a zip code basis and doing it for other reasons. But our request to them was that there is a consistent definition of a COVID death. The issue is that so many people were being counted as COVID deaths that died with COVID rather than from COVID. So if you had cancer and you got COVID and you were dying, you were in hospice and you were dying from cancer and you were going to die in the next 3 days anyway, then you were counted as a COVID death as well as a cancer death. I did see those numbers. I did see the change in the CDC numbers. I don't remember where it was. It made sense to me that those people were the only people that died actually from COVID without any comorbidities. The question becomes, how much did the comorbidities play into the COVID numbers? And I don't think we will ever know that because nobody is going to go back retrospectively and look at all of those things. There was what was it? It was a video I watched it was a summit. I'm trying to think now. It was with a lot of people. And there was a coroner or a pathologist on it. And she was saying that she was doing death certificates during COVID. And she agreed that the COVID numbers were overreported and that the comorbidities were not given as much credibility. So the number that we have is that, yes, that huge number of people that have died from COVID in the US, it's died from or with COVID. They had COVID at the time of death, although they had COVID via PCR test, which opens up another whole can of worms because PCR tests are not viable either with the cycle thresholds we've been using. My employer requires me to be vaccinated to go into the office. I am the facility manager, so doing my job requires me to be on site 25 to 50% of the time. Can I claim some legal right to go on site to do my job? Any suggestions of how I can overcome this limitation from going on site to work without being vaccinated. So the first thing I would do is file a religious exemption, because that gives you some wiggle room. I think the second thing is, if you can wait a week or 2 weeks, or till a month would be ideal. But if you can wait a little bit, I think there's going to be more CDC information that comes out that says that vaccinated people and unvaccinated people can be in the same space. And I would say, if you are the only person that is not vaccinated, my argument would also be, what harm are you? Who are you risking other than yourself? Because if the other people got vaccinated, they're vaccinated. They're in their own bubble. And so you are taking it on yourself that you're not vaccinated. But the fact that, if everyone else is vaccinated, you're not a risk to them. Okay. Do you have any suggestions of what airlines are more likely to impose vaccine requirements? I'm flying in August. I do not. I think it will be interesting to see. I don't think, as I said, similar to travel, I don't think that it will just be vaccines. I think you will have either vaccinated or have a negative PCR test. Are you aware of any health safety issues with the swabs used for PCR COVID tests? So if you watch any of the videos I've done before on this, my answer is get a saliva test. So you're spitting out into something, you're not sticking something in you. People ask me this question all the time. Does it have nanobots on it? Does it have, COVID on it? Does it have the vaccine on it, on these tests that they stick up your nose or in your mouth? Is the technology there for them to be able to do that? Yes, 100%. Is that on the vaccine, on the swab, on the PCR swab? I have no idea. I personally would prefer not to take the risk, and I will just spit into something. Many places you can't get the saliva test at school, at work, wherever. You can get them privately from places like Costco. They do cost money, so that is is an issue. But if you have, there are schools that have tests. If your school is requiring testing, I would ask them to switch to a saliva test for your kids. If your employment is requiring testing, I would ask them to switch to a saliva test. Where can I get a homeopathic vaccine card? So homeopathic vaccines are called homeoprophylaxis. They are, as I said, they're not medically proven in any way, shape, or form. They are specifically the ones for the childhood vaccines today. There are studies from Cuba on other vaccines or other diseases for those diseases, the homeoprophylaxis for those. But there is no, for example, for the MMR, there's no measles, mumps, rubella homeoprophylaxis clinical trials or any kind of research on them. So, not saying who they are, but homeopathic doctors will do homeoprophylaxis. Your child has to take the course of them. And as I said, I'm not saying that they will be accepted for school. Can I legally avoid being tested? It's a really tough one. I think there is an argument there, but they're making accommodations. So can you legally avoid being tested? Most likely the answer would be yes, you can work from home, or you can't be in contact with other people. You have to wear a mask. You have to wear, I think there are ways. I think I think June 15th is going to say something, because, for example, schools currently are still testing. The schools that started testing for COVID are still testing for COVID, even though pretty much everyone in California is in a yellow or orange tier. The only people that are supposed to be being tested are symptomatic people in schools. So I think the argument can become, we have such low levels of COVID that only the people who are symptomatic should be being tested. It's a argument that I haven't taken all the way out. I think the other piece is what cycle threshold is being used for the test that you're being requested to do, because you want one that is low so that it's really only getting people who actually have COVID. COVID vaccine officially works for about a year. Do you think it's reasonable that we will all be going through this vaccination clinics madness every year? I honestly don't think you can say that it works for a year, because we have no idea, because nobody's had the vaccine for a year. So I don't know who is officially saying that, but I don't think you can say it. I don't think we'll be going through the vaccination clinics in this madness, will they be available? Yes, I think they'll be available. I think it'll be interesting to see, when you're getting booster doses, if the first vaccine of the 2-dose vaccines, the first vaccine isn't too bad, the second vaccine is horrible for many people, what is the third vaccine going to be like? And similar with the flu vaccine, only 50% get it every year. So I think it's going to be hard to, I think people are going to get it less and less. How do they judge a sincerely held religious belief exemption? So basically they can't judge your religion, but it has to sound like it is coming from you. And that's a big reason why when we send out our recommendations, we don't send out a template. I do not have a template written anywhere, even for myself. When I get religious exemptions sent to me to get help with, or to have a read of them to see whether I would believe that they are sincerely held, I don't go to a letter going, oh, does it have this in it? Because everyone's religion is their own, and only you know what your religion is, and only you can speak your truth, your religious truth yourself. And so it has to come from you. If you take any of these templates that are out there, and people send me the templates and I'm like, try again, because I've just read 5 of those in the last week, and they say exactly the same thing. If you file that, I can guarantee you that they've had 5 others of them as well. And when you file it, it's not going to come across sincere, because it's not your religious beliefs. So my perspective is, write it from your heart and from your religious truth, and then it is much more likely to be accepted. What would qualify for a medical exemption for an adult? As I kind of answered that, but there aren't very many reasons for the COVID vaccine. I think as we go further along and more reactions are recorded and more data is found, then there may be contraindications. But at this point, I don't think there are very many. And there is not a religion that I know of that supports no vaccines other than, actually, I shouldn't say that. Christian Scientists, maybe. Basically, the religions that do not believe in any medication and that believe prayer is what will heal you, those ones don't believe in vaccines. I would say the Amish also don't necessarily believe in vaccines. I think some Amish get vaccines, but many of them do not. Yes, good point by this person. To UC staff, faculty, students, and parents, and I would say anyone. The COVID vaccine policy is not yet approved, but is up for public comment through May 31st. Please submit comments on this policy to your local policy office. I would say yes, please do that. The 2 things that I would say is that they absolutely require a religious exemption. That's number 1, and that they don't discriminate or in any way single out your child. So for example, mask wearing, if they're going to require masks, then they need to require masks of everyone, rather than just have the people who are unvaccinated have a mask. Okay, next question. Can you require private school or college to sign an affidavit of liability for mandated vaccination? Good luck with that. So could you ask them for it? Yes. Will they do it? I'm pretty sure no. Big Pharma runs a marketing company geared towards children. They have influencers on Reddit and other sites for teens. That's how they sway teens to get the COVID vaccine. And then there are celebrities, etc. Is there any site specifically for children to educate them about the danger of vaccines? No, not that I know of. And I would love somebody to do this. And I'm happy for a Voice for Choice advocacy to work with the person. I'm happy to do what's needed. I don't have the bandwidth to do it. I also don't have the knowledge of teen, TikTok and all of that stuff. But so if there is anyone out there, I'll put this plea out there. If there's anyone out there who wants to take this up, please, please, please send me an email, and I would, and please make sure that you have you or your friends and you have the capability to actually move it forward. So by that, I mean, you're willing to, become the leader of this piece and know what types of things would be required. You have teens, maybe, for example, that are on TikTok and all the rest of it. So I think it is something really important, because I think this age group is very influenced, and they're also the age group that are going to get their kids, they're next moving into having kids and getting their kids vaccinated. So I do think it's important. Okay, do I have any information on titer tests to help kids enroll in school? Yes, so we have been working with CDPH. I sent them another email today saying that they needed to respond to me. It's been 2 months and they've been, I've gotten responses saying, we're going to get back to you, we will get back to you, but I really have put pressure on them to accept titer tests without a medical exemption. You can use titer tests if you have a medical exemption, but not many doctors will even do that because they don't want to be in the CARE-ME system. So we are working on it. And I hope to have news, but right now the answer is you have to have a medical exemption for them. Okay, which is the most lenient on medical freedom? Okay, so I think you go from the extremes. The extremes on no medical freedom are California and New York. Those are probably the two worst. Best, South Dakota, Florida, probably the two best states to be in. I think there's a whole lot in between. Okay, there are many families that are divorced with joint custody. Joint custody means that both parents need to make medical decisions. I don't believe the vaccination centers are waiting for both parents to consent. In fact, the form came out for a parent to sign if their relative or babysitter will be taking them. There is only one line for a signature. My daughter's father got the vaccine and was rallying for our daughter to get it. He argues that it's her decision. I'm worried he will take her without my consent. We had a medical exemption for my daughter. The school said it expired in 7th grade and that we have to get another one. Is that true? It's not easy to find a doctor to write a letter. So the 7th grade issue, if she's in 7th grade, then yes, that's the checkpoint and it is no longer valid. This issue with vaccines and custody, you actually bring up a good point, which I hadn't thought of before, which is that they are only requiring one parent to sign and they really need both parents to sign. So that may be something I am going to make a note that to send to the schools that for divorced parents, they do need to get both parents' signature. I have non-divorced parents where the parents have differing opinions and the child has gone to the parent that they know will allow them to take the vaccine. And I've actually had this happen with the divorced parents as well, that will allow them to take the vaccine and have gotten them to sign off and have gone to the clinic by themselves or with a friend and gotten the vaccine. And I agree with you. I think it is a travesty. I mean, thank God, first of all, let's just say thank God they're actually requiring parent signatures, because there are counties that are trying to push that through, that as of 12 years old, you don't need parental consent. The one thing I will say is, if you do not want your child vaccinated and there are vaccine clinics on campus on a specific day, do not send your child to school that day. Okay, you are asking for trouble by sending your child to school on a day that there is a vaccine clinic at school that day. Either because they're going to go get it, or because the school nurse says, okay, everyone come along, let's go, and they get the vaccine. So I don't have much help for you on that one, but yes, it happens. But I do like what I would do in that case is send a letter to the vaccine clinic, to the school, whoever's organizing it, all of the above, and say, we're divorced. You need both parents' signature before giving a vaccine. If you just have one parent sign it, I will hold you liable for that. So I think that's a place where you can hold them accountable for it. But I would send a letter to the school stating that they have to have both parents' signature. I think that's a good thing to do. Okay, I heard the FDA pulls vaccines when death reaches 50 people. How are these vaccines not pulled with 4K dead? Oh, such a good question. So they should have done something. What they are saying is they are investigating these deaths. So initially, and I will give them this initially because I haven't done it in the last week, but every VAERS death report, it's very sobering. But initially, when all the sort of 80-plus-year-olds were getting the vaccine, most of them were in nursing homes. Most of them were, you had to ask, would this person have died 2 days after anyway, or a week after anyway. You know, the vaccine may have sort of sped it along, but would they have died inevitably relatively quickly anyway? So I think there was an argument there to say that, you know, you were giving it to old people that were nearly dead anyway. I think now that we're into regular, you know, every age, I think that's the place where it becomes less of a, you know, they had a comorbidity. And so I think, I mean, the FDA should be looking into it. I think they are looking into it, but they're not looking into it quickly enough. And I think, you know, in my personal opinion, they are waiting until we get to the point where vaccines are, you know, pretty universal. And they're at that point, maybe they'll come out with, oh, there are some side effects to them. And, you know, yes, there have been some deaths from them, but we're not pulling them. The other thing I think they're probably waiting for is another vaccine that is decent. I think the J&J vaccine wasn't that one. I think they, you know, there's definitely a leaning towards the mRNA vaccines to keep them out there. But is there any way to find out how many medical exemptions have been approved through the CareME system? If it would be publicly available, then couldn't we push back that the system isn't really working? I don't know that there is, I don't know if I could do a public records request on that. I probably could actually. I don't think that many have been filed now because it only came into effect. It doesn't, you know, I would do it probably in October because that's when, you know, kids have gotten into the school system. But your answer of it isn't really working versus their answer of it isn't really working is they've just reduced the number of medical exemptions to 5 or 10 or 50. And so it's a great roaring success because clearly all those other medical exemptions were fake medical exemptions. Schools and districts refer that they only follow what they are told by the administration, Biden, Newsom, county. How can one get through to the school principal superintendent? I think you need to keep talking to them and educating them, but I also think you need to go to the county board of supervisors. So the superintendent is hired by the Board of Education, the local Board of Education, and the Board of Supervisors hires the local county health officer. And so those are the two places where you can give public comment and have an in. The other thing I would say is go, you know, we need more people to run for these offices during election time. You know, we can't make change when you've got the same thought in there. Okay, this was the question that was asked and then came back. As per the new Santa Clara order passed to date, the main things include employees can return to offices. Social distancing is not required in businesses. Employers must track which employees are vaccinated and which are not, and keep safety rules for those who are unvaccinated. Workplaces and schools must continue to report confirmed cases of COVID. So my question is there any way to protect the privacy of an individual with regard to sharing their vaccine status with their employer? So I think this falls into, and I'm going off the top of my head, I need to look into this more. I think this goes into, I would split into 3 realms. One, if you're part of a union, I think you go to your union rep and you talk to your union rep, and they, you're contracted through your union. And so they have a say and they can't put this in place for union employees. So that's one place. If you are a part of a private employer, it is, I'd have to look at the writing of the county and what their mandate actually is. If they are mandating that the employers track vaccinated and unvaccinated, then the employer would have to do that because they have to follow county statute. But the question is it a statute or is it a guideline? And that's the big difference here. So I think it's still not a law. So it's we have to look at what they actually wrote and what they actually put out there. Now, people will say, oh, but it's the local county health officer and they can't make laws. They can't make requirements. But under AB 262, which was passed in 2019, the local health officer under statute has the ability to put in action, to take any action that they believe necessary in the time of an epidemic. An epidemic is 3 people or the threat of an epidemic. So they do have that authority under AB 262, but it really depends on how it's written and how that is. So I will take it upon myself and I will go read the order and see what my answers are. But I don't have, if it is required by the local county health officer and it is an order, then it has to be followed by law. And I think that's something that we need to push back on. Again, it's your board of supervisors that you want to go to talk about this stuff, because the board of supervisors is the one that's overseeing the county health officer. In case we are able to get an IEP in the fall, do they allow for conditional admission while we figure out the IEP status? Yes, they do. So you need to argue that that you want conditional status while you're figuring out the IEP. If you have IEP issues that are real, you've sort of gone your first few rounds and they are real IEP issues, I highly recommend Educate Advocate. They're an amazing organization. 3 people that work there are just phenomenal on special needs advocacy. But I will say they are super busy. And so, we've had people say, oh, I just need to get an IEP then. My child has some small issue. And what you have to realize with an IEP is that they are for special needs children. They are for children that need additional help inside or outside the classroom to get them into mainstream classroom as much as possible. And if you have a child that does not really need therapy or whatever it is, and you're just trying to do it because you want to get your kid in school, that is so not fair on the children that do need those services, because you're taking away from those children. And so, people come to me and say, oh, well, my child has sort of speech issues. Do you think I'll be able to get an IEP? You may. The other thing is, if your child is put on an IEP and they go to speech services for a year and their speech is resolved, then you no longer have the IEP and you still have to go to school. You still have to find a way to go to school. So it's not a long-term answer for those parents either. Are religious exemptions allowed in private high schools? They are not in California. There is no religious exemption for K through 12. What is the most viable way for parents to gather and stand up against unnecessary medical interventions for kids who have no COVID risk? This is unethical medicine, and I don't want it as even far. As I said, I would join Stand Up California, your local county, but you need to go to your board of supervisors and your board of education, your district, your school district. I am preparing a document to object to forced testing in order to attend my daughter's graduation. Is there any resource that can review my letter? I based the information on today's CHD legal posting. I'm happy to review any information that people send me. So if you have a document you want, if you have a document that you want, me to review, I'm happy to do it. I will say, as I said before, I'm about 3 or 4 days behind in my email. So if you want it overnight, you're not going to get it overnight from me, but I'm happy to do it. And I'm happy to do it free of charge. Can you please share which colleges in California accept a religious exemption for all vaccines? They are smaller private colleges. I don't have a running list of them. What my recommendation is for kids is to go look at what colleges you're interested in and then look at their vaccination requirements. It's an unwieldy, or it's a very wieldy process to go through each of them, especially because so many of them changing on a daily basis. So it's really look for the college that you are interested in and then look for their recommendations. What would you recommend 12 to 15-year-olds reply to their peers' teachers when being asked about the COVID vaccine status? My kids are being asked, there's a lot of pressure, and I'm not sure what they should answer. So I think there are multiple answers. I think it depends on how outspoken they are. They would range from, we're talking to my doctor about it to determine whether I'm a good fit for it, whether I can get it. And that sort of pushes off the answer. That's probably the most sort of lack of information one. I think if they are outspoken, I would get them educated on it. I would have them say, there have only been 1,000 teens our age that have had this test in the clinical trials, and my parents want to wait until there's more data, until there's more information and the long-term side effects and safety is assessed. Something like that. And I think there's, anywhere in between and way more than that. So, but those are the two that I would recommend. Can you please talk about conditional acceptance as an option? So conditional acceptance is when your child is getting vaccinated. Supposedly what's supposed to happen is that on the first day of school, they should have one of every single vaccine that's required. So usually that's 5 of them. And that you have a doctor's appointment for the next possible date that your child can get the next vaccine. So for example, the DTaP has a month between it. The MMR has 6 months between it. So you would have an appointment for that date. There are schools that will allow a medical exemption for, not a medical exemption, do not require a medical exemption for a longer schedule. The doctor just needs to write out what the schedule is and when your appointments are to get the vaccinations. And many schools accept that rather than having them to put it into the medical exemption, the CARE ME. If my doctor is not disciplined on the list, can I assume that he won't be disciplined and we are okay to stay in school? Oh no, the list is still growing. The question is, how often will they update the list? So, will they send out an email as soon as a doctor has been disciplined and the schools have to sort of check against that? Or will they do it once a year, twice a year, and then your school will just check it at that point? We don't know. What about a religious exemption for the meningitis vaccine at UC? It is only the COVID and the flu shots that have a religious exemption at this point. Okay, next question. People have started to send affidavits to public employees in Southern California, especially. What's your position on this? Will a Voice for Choice send these to county officials and others? We will not. We have looked into this process and, basically, if that's where you want to spend your time and effort, go for it. I personally think they're a waste of time and effort, and there are more important places that people could be spending their time and effort. Now, there are people that are extremely passionate about them, and if that's what you're passionate about, you go for it, because where your passion lies is where you're actually going to do something. So, I will say go for it. But for me, so the notice of liability basically puts them on notice, okay, that they are liable. They will receive those. They may read the first page. The ones that are like tens of pages long, they're never going to read past the first page. Most likely their admin gets it and throws it in the trash, or maybe says, oh, you got another one of these, and they go, okay, throw it in the trash. So there's the notice of liability. You then follow up with a second document that, basically puts them on notice that you're going to sue them and you're going to take them to court over it. Great. They go, okay, fine, bring it on. My question for anyone putting these notices out is, are you personally actually going to take these people to court, which costs time, money, effort, is a long process. If you're not planning on taking them to court, then, great, you've done what you've done, but there's not really an end, thing that you're actually taking action on. It also makes them very defensive. And, I'm not a believer in making people defensive. I'm a believer in educating. You'd be better off having a meeting with your board of supervisor, your individual board of supervisor, who you can have a meeting with, and trying to explain your side of the story and get them on, as I said, put your arm around them rather than, throwing insults at them or throwing stuff at them. People will say that, that's not the way we should do it. And so I'm open to people doing this if that's what you're passionate about. I personally don't think it's a viable way forward, and I don't think it works. People in movement, I think it is, will say, oh, but we've had people resign after they got all these letters. I find it hard to believe that that's the reason, the people resigned. And certainly there are a lot more people that didn't resign when they got these letters than did resign. So, I think I personally feel there is better time and money spent on education and on being compassionate than sending those out. And if you truly are willing to go to the last step and file a court case against them, and you feel you have a win in court, then maybe it's worth doing. Should we not enter our exemption on the care system, and why? Who has access to it? So a grandfathered medical exemption, you don't have to enter into the care system. You can't enter into the care system. It's only if you have a new medical exemption. And then if you have that medical exemption, the only way you can submit it is through the care system. But your doctor has to do that. Okay, my question is related to the language in the Companion Bill 714. We saw a doctor in December and were issued medical exemption for our daughters. I did not submit them to our school at the time because one of my daughters still had one from Dr. Sears. I made sure to get the new ones in December because I knew everything would change Jan 2020. Finally, now our school is saying that our updated ME, so I sent them the new ones from December 2019, and they're telling me that they cannot accept them for two reasons. The doc we used has a pending accusation. In the Companion Bill, it should be issued prior to 2020. It does not say issued and submitted. So I would say send me an email. We do have a parent that had a similar situation where they had two medical exemptions. One got revoked or, because of the disciplining, and they were able to get the second one accepted. So there is a chance, if there is a pending accusation, my guess is your doctor is going to be disciplined very soon. And so you're not, that one's not going to work either for very long. Do you know of any cases of teenagers being injured by COVID vaccines? I read one Utah boy was injured, blood clots. So I do believe there have been some in the trials, but there's only been 1,000 kids in the trials, in the Pfizer trials. So, it's the odds are against you trying to have injuries in that size of a group. Would your organization work with Children's Health Defense or to gain more clout, more people with litigations, etc.? So we talk to Children's Health Defense people probably once a week, once every other week, maybe once a month, maybe more often. We definitely work together. I wouldn't say we work together, but we definitely talk to each other, especially the California chapter. We talk to each other about what we're doing. I'm not a huge fan of litigation, honestly, especially in California and New York, which is where they bring things forward. If I were a national organization, I would bring forward litigation in a state that is less blue, because I think you have more precedents. For example, I'm looking at Connecticut is still blue, but the Connecticut just had their religious exemption revoked, and we are looking at that case in particular to partner with, or not to partner with, but to support, to take up to the Supreme Court as a win, because I think in Connecticut it's much more likely than here. Do you know anything about reporting an employer to OSHA for requiring the shot? So OSHA isn't saying that you can't require the shot. They're just saying that if you require it, it becomes a liability for the employer. So for a person who has a medical exemption and their work will be creating an accommodation of working from home for those who cannot receive the vaccine, does the person who has the medical exemption have recourse to be able to work in the office? Here in California, they've already been vaccine injured, hence the medical exemption, and they are really out of luck being able to go into their office. Seems terribly wrong and unfair. So no, that the employer, as long as they are making an accommodation, if that's the accommodation they're requiring, then there really isn't. As I said, I would wait till June 15th. I really think come June 15th, we're going to see how this all shakes out. I'm not saying that it won't, things like that won't happen, but I do think that it's, that changes are coming. Okay, my daughter's college is holding the vaccine over her head by saying if the FDA approved her scholarship will be, if it's FDA approved, her scholarship will be taken away and will not be able to play and no in-person classes if she doesn't get the vaccine. What can I do? This is a Cal State college. I think you need to wait until their final policy comes out. They haven't finalized their policy. I would write to the school and share your concerns about that piece of the policy, because they have not come out with the full policy yet. Did you help a UC or CSU staff or faculty write an accepted religious exemption for the flu mandate last year? Yes, hundreds of them. As I said, you need to go back and listen to what I need from you to help you with that. Okay, there's Ohio nullified the governor's order. Newsom's order can be vetoes in California also. Can the Newsom's order? So there are different laws that apply here in California to Ohio. And so the same argument does not hold true here. Kevin Kiley and James Gallagher had a lawsuit that if there was anyone that would have won it, it would have been their lawsuit, but they did not win it. I don't know if they appealed it. I don't know if they're going to take it further. My guess is Newsom's order is going to end June 15th. But again, our public health officers don't have the ability to override that. Do you know if California state colleges will allow proof of immunity in lieu of the vaccine? They used to allow titers instead of the vaccine. It's a really good question. I have not seen anything on titer testing. This vaccine is really interesting because you're supposed to get the vaccine even if you've had the disease. And so it's completely not what you would expect from immunologists. And it's interesting, there's a doctor called Z-Dog who is, but pre-COVID, he was completely against anti-vaxxers. He was so pro-vaccine. And it's been interesting watching him over the course of this, that he has basically, he's very much a libertarian is where he is. And he calls himself the alt middle, where he really assesses everything. And he was saying that it's crazy that they're throwing immunology out of the window on this one, that if you've had the disease, you still need to get the vaccine. I would like to see titer testing allowed. And I think it's something that I would recommend also when you send in your request to the UC system and the CSU system, to include that if you've had it, that a titer test would be allowed. Where do you think we are on COVID vaccine safety? Do you believe the VAERS numbers are correct? Do you think the vaccines will cause infertility, or is it still too early to say? I think it's too early to say on all of that. I mean, I think the VAERS data is, I was going to say accurate, but I don't think it's not accurate in so many ways. I think it is completely underreported because all those people that had a reaction during after their second dose, that felt like crap for the 3 days after, I think very few of them reported to VAERS because it was the normal reaction to the vaccine. And so they didn't even think to report it to the VAERS database because it was normal. So I think it's completely underreported there. I think there are probably some over-reporting because things happen to people that would have happened to them anyway, but they reported it because they should report it because it's a vaccine, it's an experimental or an emergency use vaccine, so they should report it. I don't think we have the real number. I think the whole infertility issue, we're not going to realize that until people start trying to get pregnant. We already have huge infertility issues, so it's going to be really hard to correlate that. But if we see in the next 10 years those with COVID vaccines not being able to get pregnant, I think there'll be research done on that. But by then it'll be too late. There's nothing you can do about it. My college son has no reason for a medical or religious exemption. He has natural immunity, and you want to be scientific, basically, in your response. So I would find it hard to believe that he doesn't have a religious belief. If he's a complete atheist, then maybe. But if he believes in you don't have to be part of a religion to have religious beliefs. If he believes that there's any sort of higher power that has an effect on the world, he has a religious belief. I think you can try. If he has natural immunity, I definitely would, and has titers to show that, or has a positive COVID test to show that, I think you could argue that. Is there a way for concerned citizens or attorneys to have a sway in whether the FDA approves this vaccine this summer, rather than in 2 to 3 years that would be typical? So you can send public comment to the FDA. I think it will, even if they get swamped with public comment, which I don't think would happen, but even if they did get swamped with public comment, I think the powers that be are way too influential on that. Not that I don't think it's worth trying, but I think it's, it is predetermined. How can we get our masks off our children in school? I think you need to do more than emailing. You said you emailed a whole load of people. I think you need to do more than emailing. I think you need to get people in your county to show up at school board meetings. I think showing up in numbers is the only way that it works. And it's really hard because there are so few people in many areas, not in all areas, but I do think that you have to show up. You have to show up with your kids. And I would join Stand Up California, your county, and to find people that will do the same thing. Best answers for, are you vaccinated? So if somebody were to ask me, it depends who it is. If someone were to ask me, are you vaccinated? My answer was, Do you have HIV? Because that's basically what they're asking you. And that usually stops them in their tracks. Or I may just say, it's really interesting that you asked that question. Is there any other medical information that you'd like to know about me before I answer that? Because while you're asking that, should I get my doctor's records for you or something to that effect? It really depends on who's asking as to how far I go with it. Should we already write religious exemption even before the EUA is lifted? I think you can have it prepared and ready, yes. Do you know if the ACLU has been contacted by organizations about civil rights violations that surround COVID vaccine mandates or mask mandates? And the ACLU has put out information on vaccine passports. They haven't done it on either of those. I don't think they will touch vaccines after SB 277. And they're very, very public, especially here in California. They're very public health oriented. Is there a legal basis for cease and desist requests for education facilities using schools as vaccine clinics? No, I mean, I think vaccine clinics and health clinics on school grounds they may even be in our statute, but no, they're not. I don't think there's any way of stopping that unless, you protest it. How do I find people who are willing to talk about their experience of serious adverse effects from the COVID vaccine? My friend is suffering with neurological problems 6 weeks out from her vaccination and wants to find others who are experiencing anything similar. There are Facebook groups for that. If you look up COVID vaccine injury, COVID vaccine reaction, there are Facebook groups that have many people on them. Will our invalid medical exemptions from California be valid in other states? They may be, it depends on the law. So some states allow doctors from out of state to write medical exemption, but some do not. So like in California, you have to have a California physician that writes your medical exemption. Can you confirm rumors in some cases that magnets stick to the site of the COVID vaccination? I would love to try this out on someone. I've seen the videos. They basically put a magnet on where the person's been injected and the magnet sticks there and it doesn't stick anywhere else. I have no idea whether it's true or not. I did have a friend ask their good friend of theirs if they went to them and said, I want to try sticking a magnet, and the person who was vaccinated was like, you're not doing that, which I thought was kind of funny because they're clearly scared of something if that's the case. I don't, but please, if anyone can test it out, please test it out and let me know. I will be traveling to Europe this summer, European citizen. How is the look with COVID tests traveling between countries? Question only if you know this. So I've looked into it because my parents live in Europe, and it really depends on the country, but you have to get a test before you go to most countries, and there is quarantine. So for example, Switzerland, you have to have a COVID test 72 hours, within 72 hours of traveling, you have to have a COVID test the first day you're there. If it comes back negative and they do the rapid test, if it comes back negative, you're free to go. No quarantine at all. In England, for example, right now, you fly in, you have to have a negative test before you go. You have to have a negative test in the first 2 days and then one on the 5th day, and you have to quarantine for 10 days, regardless of what those tests say. So you really need to look at your country. They're also changing, not constantly, but they change often enough. So look before you go. It does change, and they are all different. But yes, going from one country to another within Europe, the same thing applies at this point. Our high school wants to make vaccines mandatory for the next school year. I have a 15-year-old wanting to do the Johnson & Johnson. This has not been approved for kids. I do not, under any circumstances, want him to get the mRNA. Number one, if your high school is in California, they cannot mandate COVID for the next school year. If they're doing that, please send them my way and I will send a letter to them. I think the J&J vaccine or the Novavax vaccine will probably be approved for 12 to 15-year-olds sometime in the nearer future. I don't know when though. So I believe both of them are doing clinical trials on that age group. If a college in Minnesota has a conscientious objector rule for vaccines, will they be able to mandate COVID vaccines for their students in the fall? No, they would have to have that conscious objector rule as well. Okay, my son is in 7th grade next year. We are not vaccinated. Does SB 277 state that the school gets to determine how they interpret the law, or are schools expected to follow the bill as written? The law is the law, so they should be following the law. If there's gray areas in the law, then it's probably up to their interpretation. If my child has an IEP and if the COVID vaccine becomes mandatory, will my child be able to avoid it due to the IEP? They should if they don't change that part of the law. It really depends on how the bill's written and what the law says in the end. If my doctor, who is not on this 92-page list, sent to schools, but the school jumps the gun and tries to invalidate it, can I contact you for help? My doctor is suing the medical, probably the only one who is. I have received, he's saying some schools are being called regarding his license. So I'm assuming I know the doctor you're talking about. His probation was not stayed. And so his disciplinary action is in action. He has been put on probation for 5 years. He is currently on probation. He is appealing that and asking for a stay, which if he is granted the stay, which honestly, I don't think he will be, knowing the legal system, but if he is granted that stay, then yes, it would reinstate your vaccine exemption until he goes through the full appeals process. And depending on the outcome of that. My son is in preschool and had an IEP with a medical exemption. He is exiting out of the IEP. Will his medical exemption still count without the IEP in kindergarten? No, at kindergarten, he's in a new checkpoint and he has to go through the CARE ME system and have a new ME. Do you know of templates for religious exemptions for the Jewish faith? I don't recommend any templates. You will not be considered to have sincere religious exemption. Write it from your heart, find the texts that resonate with you from texts if you read them, or give your history of what your religious beliefs are. That's the most authentic, and that's what's going to get you what you have. What to send a private school who is highly suggesting a COVID vaccine for 6th to 12th graders? They're also sending vaccination survey to be able to determine their vaccine rate. I assume it's a personalized link. I'm planning to answer it, but if they call me, what should I say? I think you have to just explain what your thoughts are. I would be very scientific in the sense of science. You don't want to come across as a quack, because the minute you come across as a quack, you are considered, everything goes out, doesn't matter what comes out of your mouth, even if it's the most, sane stuff. So I would just say to them, I'm just not comfortable right now giving this to my child. There's only been 1,000 teens that have been, in the clinical trials. We're just waiting to see what happens. I wouldn't, if you come across as, aggressive and I don't want this vaccine because it's going to kill everyone. It's not killing everyone right now. So, you come across as crazy, and if people think you're crazy, they're going to write you off. You need to build the relationship, build the rapport, and educate them and get them the information so that they're then questioning the vaccine. So yes, so this question is a good one. I have a child who got grandfathered until the next entry point in 7th grade through SB 714. I will likely have to take him out of school next year because of the mask mandate. Will he lose his exemption by being homeschooled or out of state for 1 year? The answer is yes. If you take your child out of school, they become a new admission when they enter back in, and their medical exemption no longer counts. So we had a lot of people that didn't ask that question, took their kids out this year, and are in that situation. They can't put their kids in. Now, if you have your child in a charter school that is part of the public school system and you have your medical exemption on file with that charter school, then you can, then they're considered part of the public school system still, and you may be able to get them back in. Do you know how many cases of young girls whose hormones have been adversely affected after getting 1 or more injections? So I think you're referring to what I mentioned about puberty and not getting vaccinations during that time. I would look at the HPV vaccine. I mean, that's the one that is given during puberty most often. And there definitely is some stuff there, although it's not well documented because, of course, the vaccine industry doesn't want that to say it. You mentioned 10 shots required for 7th grade. My school is saying 9 to start, then additional shots. What am I missing? So you have polio is 3, DTaP is 3, 6, hepatitis B is 2, MNR is 2, and varicella is 2. You don't need hepatitis B, the 2 for the 7th grade. Do you know anything about the saline gargle test? If so, would the spit test be preferable? No idea about a saline gargle test, but yes, I wouldn't put anything inside me that I have to get out. Talking points for the Board of Supervisors or council meetings. Yes. So we are coming out with ones for the vaccine passport, but if there are any, what I would love, like a Voice for Choice Advocacy doesn't have a lot of people, and I'm going to wrap up soon. I don't think I have too many more questions, but I will say this now, and that is a Voice for Choice doesn't have a lot of people working for us. We don't have a lot of money. I spend, probably 60 to 80 hours a week on a Voice for Choice advocacy. I have some amazing interns and people that do work for us, but what we would really appreciate if you can come up with talking points. If you want to take our letters and come up with your own talking points and send them to us and say, here's our talking points. Any help that we can get, and it's hard to put it out there and say, oh, we need help getting together these talking points. I have to say, the volunteer outreach on the disciplined doctors, thank you for everyone who has done that, because there are 9,000 doctors. And if you have time to volunteer for that, please do send us an email and I'll get you on it. But there are 9,000 doctors, and our goal is to just go through and determine how many of them have been disciplined, reprimanded, whether they're put on probation, reprimanded, whether they've had their license revoked, how long ago, what the implications of that were, so that we can put together a summary of it for CDPH and just show them how ridiculous it is. We will come out with talking points. The problem is there's only a finite number of us so to work on this. So if anyone wants to send me their talking points on various issues to have a Voice for Choice advocacy put them out, I would more than welcome them. How can we get an over-the-counter COVID antibody test? Quest Diagnostics does the antibody tests, and I think LabQuest does too, but LabQuest requires a doctor. If my college son has all other vaccines, even flu, I'm assuming they won't accept a religious exemption because we didn't file one pre-COVID. Is that correct? So the COVID vaccines use aborted fetal cells in either their creation or their testing. And so that's one place that it sort of gives a little bit of a leeway if you have a religious belief that you shouldn't be injecting aborted fetal cells. The only other ones that are on the childhood schedule that have that are the MMR vaccine and varicella. And so if your child had those two in their under 18 years, that was their parents making that decision. So there is a way to get around it. I was told an IEP does not apply to private schools. They're called ISPs in a private school, so they aren't considered an IEP. Can you confirm this? Yes, that is correct. So really, that part of the law is up to the private school as to whether they recognize the IEP from the public school and the ISP, and whether they recognize that as an exemption. So they can use it, but some private schools don't want to deal with that. Other private schools will allow it. So it's really based on the school itself. Realistically, the only thing that is covered by the law is an IEP, which are provided by public schools, and your child has to be in public school for that to be honored. Were there any teens with health problems in that group of 1,000 tested? I don't believe so. I think they all were relatively healthy. Now, there are plenty of kids that have existing health conditions, but I do believe they had the same criteria, or I know they had the same criteria as the adults going into the trials, which means there was a lot of sickness that was eliminated from being able to be a trial contestant. We registered for Stand Up California in Alameda County, but have not heard anything back. So look in your spam folder. It is going to spam sometimes, and so look in your spam folder. If you still haven't, just send me an email and I'll look into it. We were having issues with Yahoo emails, and Yahoo has not been allowing Stand Up California emails to get through. So we've asked people who have a Yahoo email address to, if you have a Proton Mail address or a Gmail address, to use that for now. If my 19-year-old son decides to get a vaccine because college is mandating it, is it best to get a J&J because it's not mRNA? What's the best one to get if you have to get it? So I stand by, I would not get the mRNA vaccine. I would get the J&J vaccine. It does have a higher clotting issue. You have to know that. The Novavax vaccine, I believe, is going to get EUA approved in the next month or two. And that is a similar vaccine methodology as the hepatitis B vaccine. My response to people who are feeling the pressure to get the vaccine, like my mother, she loves going on cruises, and she said to me, I just feel like I'm going to have to get the vaccine because I want to go on a cruise in my life again. And my answer is wait until right before you need to get the vaccine, because there are 87 COVID vaccines in the production line, and we don't know which one the best one is. We have 3 options right now. There are, many, many more to come. So I would say if you can wait as long as you can to find out, and we also, the J&J one, in the first 4 months, we saw these side effects. There are other ones that may have longer term side effects. So my answer is wait as long as you can. When is the next checkpoint after 7th grade? There isn't one. You get through till 12th grade as long as your doctor isn't disciplined. Do you think that those who work for government agencies will have a harder time getting an exemption accepted than if they work for a private employer? I don't think so. I mean, it was interesting to me that the NIH, Fauci said that only 60% of his people are vaccinated recently when he was grilled by someone in, I think it was Congress or the Senate. Will California public schools accept immunizations from out of the country? They will. If they are not in English, you will need to get them translated by an official translator that's notarized or that can verify that it actually, so that they can verify that it is real. How do you see schools verify vaccine records submitted for admission? They don't. You have to give your vaccine card. I have a talking point. Get a new amendment to the U.S. Constitution for medical freedom. Can you help work on this project, Christina? Please contact me. Getting an amendment to the U.S. Constitution is close to impossible. It's not impossible, but if you look at the number we have, and the last time there was one, it is not easy. There are, if you're going to go down that route, I would talk to the parental rights folks who have been trying to get an amendment for parental rights. The issue becomes on constitutional amendments is we have certain fundamental rights that are not written into the Constitution because they are inalienable rights. They are just so fundamental, such as parental rights, that they shouldn't be written into the Constitution. And so you just want to take that in consideration. I'm not saying medical freedom is one of those, but I personally am not going to step up to that request because it is a huge amount of effort, and it's not where I'm focusing my effort. But good luck if that's where that's where you want to go. As I said, if you're passionate about something, I'm not going to stop anyone from doing something they're super passionate about, because that's where their time and effort is best put because of their passion. It doesn't mean to say that passion is, my passion or anyone else's passion is the same. Okay, so the order from Santa Clara, just to follow up on that, says that the violation or failure to comply with this order is a misdemeanor punishable by fine, imprisonment, or both. And I believe they're quoting AB 262, which is that the local health officer has effective law properties, the ability to put that in place. I will go and read it and come back to it. Do counties in California lose federal or state money if vaccination rates are not high enough? I don't believe they do. I believe there was an incentive to get out of our colored tiers, but otherwise not. Are there any COVID vaccines that have a live virus? No, there are not at this point, at least. And then the last question is, can you explain how CARES works? So CARES is the California Immunization Registry. The actual CARE registry is where if you get vaccinated and your doctor or pharmacist is part of the CARE system, they will put your vaccine record into that system. Once it is put in, you cannot take it out. You can lock it so that no one can get access to it. So for example, schools have access to the CARE system. They can type in your child's name. They can download what vaccinations they've had. If you have it locked, they can't do that. But CDPH and those higher authorities that have access to the database still have access to your child's records. And that's the CARE system. Not all doctors are part of the CARE system because it costs money to be a part of, and it requires them to do training and have it on their system and have stuff in there. So not all doctors, if you go to see a private practice doctor, it's probably likely that they are not part of the CARE system. And so they are not inputting the vaccine records in there. I will also say that San Diego and San Joaquin area are not part of the total CARE system. They have their own CARE system, and that there's a long history in that. They've been trying to incorporate them, but they have not been able to do that yet. The CARE ME system, which is supposed to be part of the CARE system, but it's actually a completely separate system. The CARE ME system is the CARE medical exemption system, and that is for children's medical exemptions for school. And the way that works is a parent signs up, put their child's information in. That's the first step. You then, once you've done that, you get a number or letter number combination, and you take that to your doctor. Your doctor then puts that number in. It comes together with your information. The doctor fills out the medical exemption, says what vaccines your child's exempt for, whether they're temporary or permanent, and the reason why they're exempt from them. Click submit, prints you out a copy. You take that to your school. Your school then looks up the number and confirms that, yes, the doctor actually gave this to you and it is your child's ME. and then that goes on file, and then that's the way you get the medical exemption. Okay, one last question because it's 9:30. And thank you for everyone that has stayed on this long. Are COVID shots that have been given being recorded in the database? Who has access to that? I believe they can be recorded. I don't know if they are being recorded. For example, if you go to a mass vaccination clinic, I don't know if they are being recorded. Who has access to it? If you go to CARE, if you look up the California Immunization Registry, it gives examples of who has access to it. So I know, for example, schools definitely have access to it, but anyone who is allowed to look up vaccine records can get into it. Okay, we are done. I was 199, although I don't think it was actually 199 questions because there were many repeats. But thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for asking your questions, because without your questions, I couldn't do any of this. I will say, as I said, I have people reach out and say, what can I do? What can we do for you? What can we do? I will say, we run a very lean, mean machine, so to speak, but we will always take donations. If you want to make a donation to a Voice for Choice advocacy, it goes to paying the people that we do have, our interns and those types of things. It also goes to printing out flyers and our websites and our, Stand Up California and that kind of thing. I will say that, it is very economically used. We every penny is very carefully treated. If you are part of Amazon or your work has a charity donation, Amazon, you can sign up for a Voice for Choice. It's a Voice for Choice in Mountain View. It's somewhere like halfway down the list, and we get donations that way. I'm not a huge fan of Amazon, so I understand if you don't use them, but if you're using them anyway, you may as well give to us. If you have a matching program, it's a Voice for Choice. It's a 501c3, not a Voice for Choice advocacy. If you have volunteer time, you want to help out, we are always in need of volunteers. But my biggest ask of everyone when people say, what can we do, is speak up, stand up, give your points, educate yourself on, even if it's not on everything, educate yourself on what you are passionate about, and speak the truth on that and share the knowledge, because most people are unknowledgeable. They don't know very much. Then it's not that they are steadfast one side or the other. They just don't have the knowledge. And so, the more people that stand up and speak out, the more we get to that tipping point. All right. Thank you. And good night.